This is Magnificent Feed. Bold stories, raw power, no filters. What you're about to see is not just another heated political exchange. It's a seismic confrontation between two radically different worldviews. One rooted in the legacy of colonial influence, the other burning with the fire of independence and truth. Today, we take you inside the televised storm where Ibrahim Traoré, the fearless military leader of Burkina Faso, went toe-to-toe with former Trump advisor Stephen Miller, live, and left the world speechless. The setting was an international policy forum broadcasted live, with leaders from multiple continents invited to speak on issues of sovereignty, migration, security, and global cooperation. On one end of the stage stood Stephen Miller, calculated, cold, and sharp-tongued, known for his strict anti-immigration stance and controversial rhetoric about American exceptionalism. On the other end stood Ibrahim Traoré, the young, militant leader reshaping the narrative of African leadership with unapologetic defiance, Pan-African pride, and an intense critique of Western exploitation. Tension had been simmering long before the cameras started rolling. Traoré had already made waves backstage, refusing to enter through the designated VIP entrance, insisting instead that all delegates, regardless of rank, should enter together. His point was simple: equality must be lived, not just spoken. The forum began. The moderator opened with polite introductions. Stephen Miller, never shy about asserting his perspective, immediately took aim at what he called global destabilizers, indirectly blaming African leadership for their own continent's suffering. In a calm but ominous tone, he launched into one of his signature speeches, painting a picture of Western generosity, claiming that U.S. aid and intervention had long supported fragile African states, and suggesting that current instability was the fault of reckless anti-Western populists masquerading as liberators. The auditorium fell silent. The words anti-Western populist hung in the air like poison. Cameras turned. All eyes moved to Ibrahim Traoré. The Burkina Faso leader didn't flinch. He adjusted his mic, leaned forward, and began to speak. But what came out wasn't anger. It was colder. Calculated. A dismantling, not a rebuttal. He started by addressing the room, not Miller. He spoke to the world watching, the millions across Africa, Latin America, and Asia who have endured the shadow of colonial influence. His voice was clear, controlled, and deliberate. "You call it generosity," Traoré said, his gaze piercing through the lens. "But we call it control. You call it aid, but it is investment. Investment in maintaining obedience. You call it instability. But have you asked who armed the instability? Who funded the militias? Who built the debt traps? Who drew the borders with rulers and red ink?" The room shifted. Stephen Miller straightened in his chair, smirked, then leaned toward his own mic. "Let's be clear," Miller said with his classic smugness. "The United States has done more to stabilize the developing world than any nation in history. We provide food, medicine, security. What we ask for is cooperation and order." Traoré's response came swiftly, and it didn't just target Miller's words. It tore down the very ideological framework he stood on. "Cooperation," Traoré said, "should not mean submission. Order should not mean silence. When your idea of peace is the absence of resistance, then your peace is oppression in disguise." Gasps echoed from the audience. Miller's smile cracked. The confrontation had crossed from debate into moral war, and Traoré didn't stop. He turned directly to Miller now. "You talk of medicine," he said, "but during the pandemic, who hoarded the vaccines? You talk of security, but who bombs? In the name of democracy, leaving cities in rubble and calling it freedom. You talk of food, but who dictates the terms of our agriculture, floods our markets with subsidized grain, and calls it help while destroying our farmers?" Miller tried to interject, but the moderator motioned for Traoré to continue. The audience was leaning forward. Phones were out. Hashtags were already trending. This was no longer a panel. It was a reckoning. "I do not speak from theory," Traoré continued. "I speak from the ashes of villages bombed by your drones. I speak from the hospitals that were denied medicine because they would not sign IMF conditions. I speak from the mothers who bury their sons because your allies arm the enemies we're told to fight." Now Miller's face was red. He reached for his notes. His usual cool, composed posture was gone. This wasn't the script he had rehearsed. He wasn't used to being called out in such surgical detail, especially not on live television by a man from a country most American pundits couldn't locate on a map. But it wasn't just the words. It was Traoré's tone. Unshaken, unafraid, rooted in something deeper than power. It was the weight of historical truth being spoken without apology. Miller fired back with sarcasm. "So I suppose you think Africa would be better off without any involvement from the West at all?" Traoré didn't blink. "Africa was never poor until you arrived," he replied. "We had empires while Europe was in the dark. We had systems of trade, justice, and governance. What you call involvement, we call invasion. What you call development, we call dependency. What you call help, we call hegemony." The room erupted, not with shouting, but with silent awe. You could feel the energy shift. Traoré wasn't performing, he was proclaiming. Miller exploded, words tumbling over each other. "You're simplifying centuries of history. You want to blame everything on the West instead of fixing your own. Nations, you want sympathy, not responsibility." Traoré didn't raise his voice. Instead, he raised his standard. "I don't want sympathy. I want sovereignty. I don't want handouts. I want hands off." He then turned his focus from Miller to the broader conversation. Leadership is not about being loud. It's about being clear. It's about serving people, not serving narratives. "My mission is not to be liked by Western media. My mission is to restore the dignity of my people." That line would later go viral, clipped, reposted, translated into dozens of languages, and quoted in street protests from Dakar to Kinshasa. Back on stage, Miller looked cornered. No rebuttal would land now without sounding defensive. His playbook was outmatched, and then, in a final twist, Traoré pulled out a sheet of paper, a printout of classified cables leaked months earlier, revealing how Western diplomats had pressured regional leaders to isolate Burkina Faso's new government after its break from French military ties. "This is the real fear," he said, holding it up. "Not terrorism, not extremism, but independence. What threatens your systems is not chaos, it's clarity. A nation that knows itself, governs itself, and refuses to be managed from afar." Silence again. Even the moderator was speechless. Miller looked down, biting his lip. The broadcast ended minutes later, but the aftermath had only begun. In the hours that followed, millions poured onto social media. Hashtags like Not Traoré Truth, Western Ego Check, and Africa Speaks trended globally. Commentators from both the left and right weighed in. Some called Traoré dangerous. Others called him the future, but one thing was clear. Something irreversible had happened. For decades, leaders like Stephen Miller operated in safe bubbles, shielded by media, privilege, and narratives shaped to favor their positions. But Traoré shattered that bubble in real time, with facts, fire, and fearlessness. This moment wasn't just about two men arguing, it was about two worlds colliding, the old and the emerging, the imperial and the indigenous, the scripted and the awakened magnificent feed doesn't broadcast hype. We highlight history as it unfolds, and what happened on that stage is now embedded in global consciousness, a reminder that the age of silence is over, that the marginalized will no longer whisper, that the oppressed will no longer beg for seats at tables they built. Ibrahim Traoré did not just destroy Stephen Miller's ego, he dismantled a system, live on camera, brick by brick, lie by lie, and the world watched. Magnificent feed, bold stories, global voices, truth amplified.